"I'm sorry, ma'am, but this area is restricted to flight crew only." Captain Evelyn Grant paused with her hand on the cockpit door. She was wearing her uniform, 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, wings pinned above her name tag, an airline ID badge clipped to her jacket that clearly read Captain E. Grant with her employee number and a photo of her face. The same face the first officer standing in front of her was now looking at with polite, immovable certainty that she didn't belong there. "I am flight crew," Evelyn said calmly. "I'm the check airman for this training flight." The first officer, young, maybe late 20s, with the crisp confidence of someone 6 months out of initial certification, smiled the way people smile when they think they're being patient. "Right, but the check airman is supposed to be Captain Grant. I'm waiting for him now." Evelyn felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. Not anger. She'd learned long ago that anger spent energy she needed for other things. Just the particular exhaustion of being exactly who she was supposed to be and still not being seen. "I'm Captain Grant," she said, keeping her voice even. The first officer's smile didn't waver. "Look, I don't know who told you that, but there's been a mix-up. Captain Grant is a senior training captain. He's been with the airline for 26 years, Evelyn finished quietly. "I know I'm him, or rather I'm her." She held up her ID badge. The first officer glanced at it, then back at her face, and something flickered in his expression. Not recognition, doubt. "This is a check ride," he said slowly. "For captain upgrade qualification, they wouldn't send someone who—" He trailed off. But Evelyn knew how that sentence ended. Someone who looked like her. Someone whose competence wasn't assumed the moment she walked into a room. "Someone who what?" she asked gently, giving him the chance to hear himself. The first officer's jaw tightened. "I'm going to need to verify this with scheduling." "That's fine," Evelyn said. "But while you do that, I'll point out that our departure slot is in 40 minutes, and we still need to complete the pre-flight briefing. So you might want to make that call quickly." She gestured toward the cockpit door behind him. He didn't move. Behind Evelyn, another voice cut in, a flight attendant doing her boarding checks. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," the first officer said, still blocking the door. "Just confirming crew assignments." The flight attendant looked at Evelyn's uniform, at the 4 stripes, at the check airman badge clipped to her lanyard. Then she looked at the first officer and raised an eyebrow. "You're blocking a captain from the cockpit." "I'm verifying." "Her ID is right there, Jason. Captain E. Grant, check airman, which means she's here to evaluate you." The flight attendant's voice carried a mix of amusement and exasperation. "And you're failing before you even get in the air." Jason's face went red. But he still didn't move. "I just need to confirm." "You need to get out of her way," the flight attendant said, "before you turn this into an incident report." For a long moment, Jason stood frozen. Then slowly he stepped aside. Evelyn nodded her thanks to the flight attendant and stepped into the cockpit. The captain she was there to evaluate, Michael Torres, upgrading from first officer to captain, looked up from his pre-flight checklist, and his eyes went wide. "Captain Grant." "That's right," Evelyn said. "Are you ready to begin?" Michael glanced past her to where Jason was still standing in the doorway, clearly shaken. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Evelyn said calmly. "Let's get started." But as she settled into the jump seat and pulled out her evaluation clipboard, she noticed something in the way both men kept glancing at her. Not respect. Uncertainty. Like they were waiting for someone else to confirm she was supposed to be there. And Evelyn knew, with the clarity that came from 26 years of this, that this evaluation was going to be more complicated than it should be. Not because of Michael's flying skills, but because he was going to have a hard time trusting that she knew how to evaluate them. Evelyn had conducted 847 check rides over the course of her career as a training captain. She knew the script by heart. Introduction, review of standards, clarification of maneuvers, discussion of evaluation criteria. The goal was always to put the crew at ease. A check ride was stressful enough without the evaluator being intimidating. She wanted to see their best flying, not their most nervous. "Gentlemen," she began, pulling out her checklist, "this is a standard captain upgrade evaluation. Michael, I'll be assessing your performance as pilot in command. Jason, you'll be functioning as first officer. And while this isn't your evaluation, I'll be observing crew coordination." Michael nodded. Jason still looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "We'll be flying the published route to Phoenix with planned scenarios including abnormal procedures, emergency protocols, and decision-making under pressure. The goal isn't perfection, it's competence and safety. Questions so far?" "No, ma'am," Michael said. Jason said nothing. Evelyn looked at him. "First Officer Chen, do you have any questions about today's flight?" "No," he said stiffly. Then as an afterthought, "Ma'am." "Good, let's talk through the weather." She pulled up the meteorological briefing on her tablet. There was a line of storms across New Mexico, not unusual for this time of year, but it would require careful navigation and possibly some holding patterns. "Michael, how are you planning to handle this system?" Michael leaned forward, studying the radar. "Request deviation south of the line, monitor for updates, and have alternates ready in case Phoenix goes below minimums." "Good. What's your fuel reserve calculation?" "Minimum reserve plus 1 hour for potential holding and deviation routing." "Excellent." Evelyn made a note on her eval sheet. She noticed Jason watching her write, his expression still skeptical. "Something on your mind, First Officer Chen?" Jason hesitated. "No, Captain." "You sure? Because crew communication is essential, and if you're uncomfortable with something, now's the time to speak up." Jason's jaw worked. Then, "I've just never flown with I didn't know the airline had female check airmen." "We have 4, Evelyn said calmly, "and about 60 female captains total. You'll probably fly with several over the course of your career." "Right, of course, I just meant." "I know what you meant," Evelyn said, not unkindly, "and I'm going to give you some advice. The cockpit is no place for assumptions about who can or can't do the job. Your focus should be on procedures, communication, and safety, not on what your crew members look like." Jason flushed. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now let's review the emergency procedures you might see today." Part 2. The details others miss. They pushed back on time. Evelyn settled into the jump seat, a fold-down seat just behind the captain's position, and watched. This was where she lived during check rides, observing, listening, noticing the small things that separated competent pilots from excellent ones. How Michael scanned his instruments, how he communicated with ground control, how he coordinated with Jason on the checklist flows. So far, Michael was doing well, methodical, careful, good vocal callouts. Jason, however, was struggling. Not with the flying, he was technically proficient, but with the crew dynamic. Every time Michael asked for something, Jason's response was just a half-second delayed, like he was checking with Evelyn first, making sure Michael's commands were correct. "Flaps 1, Michael called. Jason's hand moved toward the flap lever, then hesitated, eyes flicking to Evelyn. "Flaps 1, he finally confirmed, completing the action. Evelyn made a note. They taxied to the runway. The morning traffic at Denver was moderate, a few departures ahead of them, but nothing unusual. Michael handled the radio work smoothly, got their clearance, positioned on the runway. "Before takeoff checklist complete," Jason called. "Verified," Michael said. "Ready." Jason nodded. Michael advanced the throttles. The engine spooled up. The aircraft accelerated down the runway. Evelyn watched the instruments over Michael's shoulder, airspeed building normally, engine parameters good, rotation at precisely VR. Clean takeoff. They climbed through 10,000 feet, and Michael's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Nice work," Evelyn said quietly. Michael glanced back. "Thank you, Captain." Jason said nothing. At 15,000 feet, Evelyn leaned forward. "Michael, I'm going to give you your first scenario. You've just received a master caution light. Left engine oil pressure is dropping. How do you respond?" Michael's training kicked in immediately. "Jason, pull up the engine abnormal checklist. I'm reducing power on engine 1 and monitoring parameters." "Oil pressure showing yellow band," Jason reported. "Checklist says if it drops to red band, we shut it down." "Agreed." Declaring a precautionary alert with ATC and requesting vectors back to Denver. Michael keyed the radio. His voice was calm, professional. "Denver departure, November 427 Alpha Mike. We have a potential engine issue and need to return to Denver." ATC responded immediately, clearing them for vectors and descent. Michael handled it perfectly. Ran the checklist, coordinated with Jason, managed the aircraft, communicated clearly. Evelyn made positive notes. But she also noticed Jason's increasing tension. He was doing his job, but barely, following orders without anticipating. No crew synergy. At one point, when Michael asked for a frequency change, Jason fumbled the radio, had to ask for a repeat. "First Officer Chen," Evelyn said quietly, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," Jason said tightly. "You seem distracted." "I'm just focused on the scenario." But that wasn't it, and Evelyn knew it. Jason was focused on her, on doubting her, on second-guessing every evaluation she made. And it was affecting his performance. They completed the simulated engine failure and returned to their planned route. 2 hours into the flight, approaching the weather system over New Mexico, Evelyn introduced the next scenario. "Michael, you're receiving reports that Phoenix is going below minimums due to dust storms. What's your decision?" Michael checked the weather updates, consulted the fuel status, and made the call. "We'll divert to Tucson. Jason, pull up Tucson approach plates and notify the cabin." "Good decision, clear communication." Evelyn made another positive note. But Jason's voice came from the right seat, tight with something that sounded like frustration. "Shouldn't we try to hold for Phoenix? We have the fuel." Michael glanced at him. "We could, but if conditions don't improve, we'd be burning fuel we might need. Tucson is the safer choice." "But the scenario might be testing whether we use our reserves properly." "First Officer Chen," Evelyn interrupted gently. "Captain Torres is pilot in command. This is his decision to make. Your role is to provide information and support that decision, not second-guess it." Jason turned to look at her directly. "With respect, Captain, I'm trying to help him pass this eval. If he makes the wrong choice." "I determine what's right or wrong," Evelyn said, keeping her voice calm. "Not you. Your job is to be a good first officer. Right now, you're not doing that." Jason's face went red. "I'm doing my job just fine." "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're undermining your captain's authority and allowing your own discomfort to interfere with crew coordination." "My discomfort," Jason's voice rose. "I'm not the one who—" He stopped himself. But the damage was done. Michael had gone, very still in the left seat. Evelyn waited. "You're not the one who what, First Officer Chen?" she asked quietly. Jason's jaw worked. "Nothing, I apologize." "No, let's address this now. What were you going to say?" Jason exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm sorry, but I've been flying for 6 years and I've never seen a female check airman. And now I'm supposed to trust that you know how to evaluate a captain upgrade. What if you're not as experienced as the male check airman? What if the standards are different? The cockpit went silent. Michael looked horrified. Jason, that's completely. It's all right, Evelyn said. Her voice was still calm, still steady. First Officer Chen is expressing a concern. Let me address it. She leaned forward slightly. I have 23,000 flight hours. I've been a captain for 18 years, a check airman for 12. I hold type ratings on 6 different aircraft. I've evaluated over 800 pilots, and my standards are not different, they're higher, because I know that every evaluation I conduct will be scrutinized in ways my male colleagues' evaluations aren't. Jason had the grace to look down. So here's what's going to happen, Evelyn continued. You're going to apologize to Captain Torres for undermining him. You're going to focus on being a competent first officer for the remainder of this flight. And when we land, you and I are going to have a conversation about professional conduct. Yes, ma'am, Jason said quietly. Michael, continue with your diversion to Tucson. Yes, Captain. They flew in silence for the next 20 minutes. But Evelyn was thinking. This wasn't the first time she'd faced doubt, wouldn't be the last. But this particular flavor of it, the open questioning of her competence, the assumption that her standards might be easier, was dangerous. Not just for her, for every female pilot who'd come after her. The approach into Tucson was textbook. Michael flew it smoothly, coordinated with Jason, who was now overly formal and stiff, and landed with barely a chirp of the tires. As they taxied to the gate, Evelyn completed her evaluation forms. Michael had passed, easily. His decision-making was sound, his flying was precise, and his crew management, despite Jason's behavior, had been professional. Captain Torres, Evelyn said as they shut down the engines, congratulations, you've successfully completed your captain upgrade evaluation. Michael's face broke into a huge smile. Thank you, Captain Grant, really, thank you. You earned it, you're going to be an excellent captain. I appreciate that, and I'm sorry about, he glanced at Jason. I should have said something earlier. You were focused on flying, that was the right priority. Evelyn stood, gathering her materials. Jason, a word please. Jason followed her out of the cockpit, into the jetway where they had privacy. First Officer Chen, I'm filing a report on today's flight. Jason's face paled. Captain, I apologize, I was out of line, I know that, it won't happen again. I believe you, Evelyn said, but an apology doesn't undo the damage. You undermined your captain during an evaluation. You questioned my credentials based on my gender, and you created a hostile work environment in that cockpit. I didn't mean. Intent doesn't erase impact. Evelyn kept her voice level. I'm recommending you for additional CRM training, crew resource management, because what you demonstrated today was a fundamental failure to work as part of a team. Jason looked at his shoes. Will this affect my record? Yes, but it won't end your career. You're a good pilot technically. You just need to learn that flying is more than stick and rudder skills. It's about trust, communication, respect. She paused, and recognizing competence regardless of what package it comes in. I understand. I hope you do, because the next time you fly with a female captain, and you will, she deserves better than what you gave today. Jason nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Evelyn left him there, and headed to the crew lounge to file her reports. Over the next 3 months, Evelyn conducted 12 more check rides. 8 of them went smoothly. 4 of them didn't. In each of those 4, the pattern was the same. A male pilot, sometimes the one being evaluated, sometimes the supporting crew member, would express surprise, skepticism, or outright doubt about her qualifications. One captain actually asked to see her flight certificates before the evaluation began. Another first officer made a joke about how she must have been a diversity hire. A third made passive-aggressive comments throughout the flight about how standards were slipping. Each time, Evelyn stayed calm. Each time, she documented everything. Each time, she filed reports through proper channels. And each time, she was told the same thing. We'll look into it. We take these concerns seriously. We're committed to a respectful workplace. But nothing changed. The chief pilot, a man named Robert Daniels who'd been with the airline for 30 years, called her into his office after the fourth incident. "Evelyn, I'm hearing concerns." "About my evaluations?" she asked. "About the number of reports you're filing. Some people are saying you're being oversensitive." Evelyn had expected this. "Robert, I'm documenting violations of our crew conduct policies, gender-based harassment, unprofessional behavior in the cockpit. That's not being sensitive. That's doing my job." "I understand, but it's creating tension. Some of the pilots are saying they don't want to fly with you because they're worried you'll file a report on them. Then they should behave professionally, and they won't have anything to worry about." Robert sighed. "Look, I know this isn't easy for you, being one of the only female Czech airmen, but maybe you could be a little more flexible. Give the guys some grace. They're not used to." "Not used to what?" Evelyn interrupted quietly. "Being held to the same standards they'd hold each other to." "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" Robert leaned back in his chair. "I'm saying that if you keep filing reports on every little comment, people are going to start questioning whether you're the right fit for this position." There it was. The subtle threat. Tone it down or lose your job. Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Robert, those comments aren't little. They're symptoms of a bigger problem. And if the airline's response is to ask me to tolerate harassment instead of addressing the people causing it, then we have a serious culture issue. No one's asking you to tolerate harassment." "Yes, you are right now. That's exactly what you're doing." Robert's expression hardened. "I'm asking you to be reasonable. I'm asking you to hold your pilots accountable." They stared at each other. Finally, Robert said, "I'll review the reports. But Evelyn, you need to understand change takes time. You can't force people to adjust overnight." "I've been here 26 years, Robert. How much more time do they need?" She stood. "Is there anything else?" "No, that's all." Evelyn left his office knowing exactly what this meant. She was on her own. Part 6, The Witness. What Evelyn didn't know was that someone else had been paying attention. Captain Lisa Mendez had joined the airline 8 years ago, one of only 6 women in her new hire class. She'd worked her way up to captain in record time, and now, at 39, she was being considered for a Czech airman position herself. She'd heard the whispers about Evelyn. Too strict, too sensitive, always filing complaints. But Lisa had also flown with some of the pilots who'd complained about Evelyn. And she'd experienced the same jokes, the same skepticism, the same constant testing of her authority. She just hadn't reported it, because she'd seen what happened to women who did. But when she heard that Robert had called Evelyn in for filing too many reports, something in Lisa shifted. She requested a meeting with the chief pilot herself. "Robert, I need to talk to you about Captain Grant." Robert looked wary. "What about her?" "I want you to know that everything she's reporting is real. I've experienced the same behavior. I just haven't filed formal complaints because I was afraid of exactly what's happening to her now, being labeled as a problem." Robert frowned. "Lisa, I appreciate you coming forward, but—" "Let me finish." Lisa's voice was firm. "Evelyn Grant is one of the best Czech airmen this airline has. She trained me when I upgraded to captain. She's thorough, fair, and her standards are impeccable. If pilots are uncomfortable with her, it's not because she's doing anything wrong. It's because she's holding them accountable in ways they're not used to being held accountable." "That's your opinion." It's not opinion, it's fact. And if you punish her for documenting harassment while doing nothing about the pilots harassing her, you're going to lose one of your best training captains. And you'll send a message to every other female pilot that we're not valued here. Robert was quiet for a moment. What do you want me to do? Your job, Lisa said simply. Investigate the reports seriously, hold the pilots accountable, and stop asking Evelyn to tolerate what you'd never ask a male Czech airman to tolerate. To Robert's credit, he did investigate. He pulled cockpit voice recordings from 2 of Evelyn's flights, where incidents had occurred. He interviewed the flight attendants, who'd witnessed some of the exchanges. He reviewed similar reports filed by other female pilots, reports that had been quietly dismissed or downplayed. And what he found made him uncomfortable. Because Lisa was right. The pattern was clear, consistent, and damning. Male pilots questioning female authority in ways they never questioned male authority. Jokes about women not being strong enough to fly, not being technical enough, being diversity hires. Passive-aggressive undermining during critical phases of flight. And when he compared Evelyn's evaluation standards to those of male Czech airmen, he found something else. Hers were more consistent, more thorough, more carefully documented. She wasn't being too strict. She was being excellent. And she was being punished for it. Robert called Evelyn back to his office. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. Evelyn sat down slowly. Go on. I reviewed everything. You were right about all of it, and I was wrong to suggest you were overreacting. I appreciate that. But I need your help. Robert leaned forward. We have a culture problem, and I don't know how to fix it. Evelyn had waited 26 years to hear those words. What are you willing to do? She asked. Whatever it takes. 2 weeks later, Robert called a mandatory meeting for all Czech airmen and senior captains. 60 pilots in a conference room at the training center. Evelyn sat in the back, watching faces as they filed in. Most were men, white men, many she'd flown with, many she'd trained. Several looked uncomfortable when they saw her. Robert stood at the front of the room. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss training standards and crew conduct, and we're going to start by addressing something that's overdue. He pulled up a slide. On it was a list of statistics. Total Czech airmen, 58. Female Czech airmen, 4. Reports of gender-based harassment filed by male Czech airmen, 0. Reports filed by female Czech airmen, 47. Reports acted upon, 3. The room went silent. Those numbers, Robert said, represent a failure, not of the women filing reports, of us as an institution for not taking those reports seriously. He clicked to the next slide. It showed Evelyn's evaluation statistics compared to 5 male Czech airmen with similar seniority. Pass rates within 2% of each other. Flight safety incidents, 0 across all evaluators. Crew commendations, Captain Grant leads by 18%. Complaints about evaluation fairness from failed candidates, Captain Grant has fewer than average. Captain Evelyn Grant, Robert said, turning to look at her, has been a Czech airman for 12 years. In that time, she has trained or evaluated 847 pilots, including 70% of the people in this room. Faces turned. People who hadn't realized. People who had. Captain Grant trained me when I upgraded to 737, Robert continued. She trained many of you. She holds more type ratings than anyone else in this room, and yet she has faced consistent questioning of her authority, her competence, and her right to be in the cockpit. He let that sink in. This ends today. Robert pulled up a new slide. New policies effective immediately. 1-0 tolerance for gender-based harassment or questioning of crew authority based on gender. 2. mandatory crew resource management, training emphasizing respect and bias recognition. 3. Fast-track investigation of all harassment reports. 4. Consequences for violations up to and including termination. We're also, Roberts said, establishing a working group to review all aspects of our training and crew culture. Captain Grant has agreed to co-chair that group. Evelyn felt 60 pairs of eyes on her. Some grateful, some resentful, some calculating. After the meeting, several pilots approached her. Some to apologize, some to thank her, and one, a captain named David Ross who'd been with the airline as long as she had, to ask a question. Evelyn, did you really train that many of us? Yes. I didn't realize. I remember my check airman was named E. Grant, but I assumed. He trailed off. You assumed E. Grant was a man, Evelyn finished. Yeah, David looked ashamed. I'm sorry, you were excellent. You're the reason I passed, and I never even thanked you properly because I didn't. Didn't see me, Evelyn said quietly. No, I didn't, and that's on me. Not everyone was supportive. 3 captains filed formal complaints, arguing that the new policies were reverse discrimination and created a hostile environment for men. The pilots' union requested a meeting to discuss concerns about changing standards. And an anonymous letter circulated claiming that Evelyn had manipulated Robert into creating policies that gave women unfair advantages. Evelyn had expected all of this. She'd spent enough time in aviation to know that change was always met with resistance, especially from people who benefited from the old system. But she'd also learned something else over her 26 years. Resistance meant you were pushing on something that mattered. The working group met weekly. Evelyn co-chaired with Captain Mark Stevens, a well-respected senior captain who'd been an ally from the beginning. Together, they reviewed every aspect of crew training. How evaluations were conducted. How feedback was delivered. How bias crept into assessments of captain presence and command authority. They discovered that women and pilots of color were consistently rated lower on subjective measures like confidence and leadership presence, even when their technical skills and decision-making were identical to higher-rated white male pilots. This is what I've been saying for years, Evelyn said during one meeting. The standards aren't being applied equally. Women have to be perfect to be considered competent. Men just have to be acceptable. Mark looked at the data, troubled. I didn't want to believe this was happening, but it's right here. So what do we do about it? We change the evaluation criteria, make them more objective, remove the subjective assessments that are clearly being influenced by bias. It took 4 months, but they did it. They redesigned the entire check airman evaluation process. Standardized language, specific, measurable criteria, blind review processes for borderline cases. And they expanded the check airman program, actively recruiting and training more women and pilots of color. 8 months after that first confrontation with Chen in the cockpit, Evelyn was asked to give the keynote address at the airline's annual training conference. 200 pilots, instructors, check airmen, management. She stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. 26 years ago, she began, I walked into my first airline interview wearing a borrowed suit and carrying my logbooks in a backpack. The interviewer looked at me and said, "Sweetheart, are you sure you're in the right room? Flight attendant interviews are down the hall." A ripple went through the audience. I told him I was there for a pilot position. He actually laughed. Then he checked his schedule, realized I was on the list, and his whole demeanor changed. Not to welcoming, to skeptical. I had to prove myself before he'd even look at my qualifications. She clicked to her first slide. I got the job, not because he was impressed, I could see in his eyes he wasn't, but because my scores were too high to ignore. And for the next 26 years, I've been proving myself over and over. Every new captain I flew with, every check ride I administered, every time someone expressed surprise that I was their training captain. Another click. On the screen, the photo of her from her first day as a first officer, standing in front of a 737, grinning. But here's what I learned. The problem wasn't me. It was never me. The problem was a system that taught people what competence looked like, and that picture didn't include women who looked like me. She showed them data, the statistics the working group had compiled. The bias in evaluations, the harassment reports, the pattern of women being held to higher standards. When I filed reports about harassment, Evelyn said, I was told I was being too sensitive. When I insisted on professional behavior, I was told I was being too strict. When I documented violations, I was told I was creating problems. She paused. But I wasn't creating problems. I was revealing them, problems that had been there all along. Next slide, the new policies, the revised evaluation criteria, the expansion of the Czech Airman program. Over the last 8 months, we've made changes, real changes, and I want to share the results. She showed them metrics. Harassment reports down by 60%. Female pilot retention up by 34%. Crew satisfaction scores up across all demographics. And most importantly, safety metrics unchanged, proving that equality didn't compromise standards. These changes didn't make flying less safe, Evelyn said. They made it more professional, more respectful, and they opened doors for the next generation of pilots who won't have to fight the same battles I did. She clicked to her final slide. It was a photo from the latest Czech Airman training class. 12 new Czech Airmen. 5 of them were women, 3 were people of color. This, Evelyn said, is what progress looks like. Not because we lowered standards, we didn't, but because we removed barriers. We recognized competence regardless of package. We built a system where everyone has to prove themselves once, not constantly. She looked out at the audience. I trained 70% of the people in this room. Many of you didn't know it, because you saw my name, E. Grant, and assumed I was a man. You flew with me, learned from me, passed your evaluations because of my training, and never realized the person who believed in you was someone you might not have believed in. The room was absolutely silent. My challenge to you is this. Don't let assumptions about competence keep you from seeing the actual competence in front of you. Listen to the first officer who raises a concern, even if she doesn't look like what you expect. Trust the Czech Airman evaluating you, even if you're surprised by who shows up. And build a culture where the next generation doesn't have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. The applause started slowly, then built, then became a standing ovation. After the conference, Evelyn was gathering her materials when someone approached. Chen. He looked different than he had 8 months ago, less cocky, more thoughtful. Captain Grant, do you have a moment? Evelyn turned, First Officer Chen. I wanted to apologize again, properly. He took a breath. I went through the CRM training you recommended, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about that flight. And I was completely wrong about everything. I questioned your competence based on your gender. I undermined captain tours. I let my biases affect my flying, and I'm ashamed of that. Evelyn waited. But I also wanted to thank you, Jason continued, because you could have ended my career. Your report could have got me fired. Instead, you gave me a chance to learn, and I have learned. What have you learned? Jason met her eyes. That competence doesn't look one way. That my assumptions about who can do what were based on bias, not reality. And that being a good pilot means being a good crew member, which means trusting and respecting everyone in the cockpit. That's good, Jason, really. But the real test isn't what you say in a conference hallway. It's what you do the next time you fly with a female captain, or a captain of color, or anyone who doesn't match your expectations. I know, and I'm working on it. I've flown with 3 female captains since our flight, and I've made it a point to be the best first officer I can be. Evelyn studied him, saw something genuine in his expression. I'm glad, she said. Keep doing that work, and thank you for the apology. As Jason walked away, Lisa Mendez appeared at Evelyn's side. That looked intense. It was good, Evelyn said. He's learning. They're all learning, because of you, Lisa smiled. I heard a rumor you're being considered for chief pilot when Robert retires. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Where'd you hear that? Robert told me. He asked if I thought you'd take it. What did you say? I said you should. Someone needs to be in that office who understands what it's like to fight for every bit of respect you get. Evelyn thought about that. Chief pilot. The authority to shape culture from the top. To hire, train, and promote the next generation. To make sure the policies they'd built actually stuck. I'll think about it, she said. Part 12, The Next Generation. 1 year after the confrontation in the cockpit, Evelyn was conducting another check ride. This time, the captain being evaluated was a woman named Tara Williams, a 32-year-old upgrading to captain after 6 years as a first officer. The first officer was a young man fresh out of initial training. When Evelyn boarded the aircraft, Tara's face lit up. Captain Grant, I was hoping it would be you. You know me. You trained me during my new hire orientation. 5 years ago. You probably don't remember. You train a lot of people, but I remember everything you taught me. Evelyn smiled. I'm glad it stuck. Are you ready? Absolutely. The check ride was textbook perfect. Tara flew with confidence and precision. The first officer supported her beautifully. The crew coordination was seamless. At one point, when Evelyn introduced a complex emergency scenario, Tara handled it so smoothly that Evelyn made a note to recommend her for the Accelerated Check Airman Training Program. After they landed, Evelyn completed the evaluation. Captain Williams, congratulations. Outstanding performance. You're going to be an excellent captain. Tara beamed. Thank you, Captain. That means everything coming from you. You earned it. Evelyn hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you experience any pushback during your upgrade process? Any questioning of your abilities because of your gender? Tara thought about it. A little. One instructor made a comment about women being too emotional for command, but when I reported it, it was taken seriously. He had to go through additional training. She paused. I heard that's because of policies you helped create. Evelyn nodded. A lot of people helped create those policies. But you started it. You were the one willing to fight when fighting wasn't easy. Tara's voice was earnest. I'm here because you made it possible, because you didn't just survive the bias, you changed the system that created it. 2 years after the confrontation with Jason, Robert Daniels retired, and Evelyn Grant became chief pilot, the first woman to hold that position in the airline's 70-year history. On her first day, she walked into the office that had intimidated her so many times over the years. The office where she'd been told to be less sensitive, to give people grace, to stop making waves. Now it was her office, her authority, her chance to shape culture. She brought in Lisa Mendez as her deputy, promoted 3 more women to check airman positions, expanded the diversity recruiting program. And she made one thing absolutely clear in her first all-hands meeting with the pilot group. This airline will be a place where competence is recognized, regardless of who demonstrates it, where professional behavior is expected, not optional, where every pilot, regardless of gender, race, age, or background, can focus on flying, not on proving they deserve to be here. She paused. I spent 26 years proving myself over and over, fighting to be heard, documenting harassment, filing reports that were ignored. That ends with my generation. The pilots coming up behind us deserve better, and we're going to give it to them. The changes at Evelyn's airline didn't stay contained. Other airlines noticed. The retention rates, the safety metrics, the crew satisfaction scores. They started asking questions. How did you improve culture so dramatically? What policies created these results? Can we replicate this? Evelyn found herself consulting with 5 other major carriers, sharing the evaluation frameworks, the harassment response protocols, the bias training curricula. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles for aviation publications, gave interviews about culture change. And everywhere she went, she heard the same stories. Women who'd been dismissed, doubted, held to impossible standards. Women who'd left aviation because they were tired of fighting. Women who stayed but carried the weight of constant proving. This is bigger than one airline, Evelyn told Lisa during one of their strategy meetings. This is industry-wide. So what do? We build a coalition, get the major carriers to adopt consistent standards, create industry-wide accountability, make it impossible for bias to hide. It took 3 years. But they did it. 7 major airlines signed onto a shared set of principles for crew culture and evaluation standards. The FAA took notice and began incorporating some of the frameworks into their oversight requirements. Flight training organizations started teaching bias recognition alongside technical skills. And slowly, painfully slowly but measurably, the industry began to change. Part 15, The Full Circle. 5 years after she became chief pilot, Evelyn was sitting in her office when her assistant buzzed. "Captain Grant, there's someone here to see you. Says she's a student pilot and was hopping for a few minutes of your time." Evelyn checked her calendar. She had 15 minutes before her next meeting. "Send her in." A young black woman entered, maybe 23, 24, wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt, carrying a logbook. "Captain Grant, I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I'm Simone Washington. I'm a junior at State, working on my commercial license." "Nice to meet you, Simone. What can I do for you?" Simone took a breath. "I'm trying to decide if I should pursue airlines or corporate flying, and I wanted to talk to someone who looks like me, who's been through it." Evelyn gestured to a chair. "Sit." Simone sat, nervous energy radiating off her. "I love flying," she said, "but I'm scared. I've already had instructors who didn't take me seriously. One told me I should consider flight attending instead because I'm too pretty to be a pilot." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "What did you do?" "I reported him. He was reprimanded. But now I'm worried that the whole industry is like that I'll spend my whole career fighting to be taken seriously instead of just flying." Evelyn looked at this young woman and saw herself 30 years ago. Bright, capable, scared. "I'm not going to lie to you," Evelyn said. "You will face bias. You will be underestimated. You will have to work harder than your male peers to get the same recognition." Simone's face fell. "But," Evelyn continued, "you won't face it alone, and you won't face it the way I did, because there are more of us now, more women in the cockpit, more allies, more systems in place to protect you, more accountability when people step out of line." Is it worth it? Evelyn thought about that. About 28 years in the air, about the fights and the frustration and the exhaustion, but also about the moment when wheels left the ground, about the view from 35,000 feet, about the lives saved by good flying and the careers launched by good training, about Tara and Lisa and the dozens of other women who told her they were there because she'd made it possible. "Yes," Evelyn said, "it's worth it. Not because it's easy, it's not, but because flying is extraordinary, and because every woman who gets into that cockpit makes it easier for the next one. Simone nodded slowly. Did you ever think about quitting? Many times. What kept you going? Evelyn smiled. Stubbornness mostly, but also the knowledge that someone had to be first. Someone had to push through so others wouldn't have to push as hard. I decided that someone might as well be me. I want to be like you, Simone said quietly. No, Evelyn said gently. You want to be like you, the best version of yourself. That's the only person you can be, but if my path helps you find yours, I'm glad. She pulled out a card and wrote her personal cell number on it. Call me if you need advice, or if you just need someone who understands. And when you get hired, not if, when, let me know. I want to know how your career unfolds. Simone took the card like it was made of gold. Thank you, Captain, really. After she left, Evelyn sat quietly for a moment. Then she pulled up her email and sent a message to the head of the airline's recruitment program. We need to be actively recruiting at HBCUs and schools with diverse student bodies. Let's talk about scholarship programs and mentorship pipelines. If she was going to be chief pilot, she was going to use that power to build the future she wished she'd had. 7 years after becoming chief pilot, Evelyn was awarded the International Aviation Leadership Award. The ceremony was in Paris. 2,000 aviation professionals from around the world. She stood on the stage and looked out at the audience. Saw pilots, executives, regulators, instructors. And sitting in the third row, Chen, who'd flown to Paris on his own dime to be there. 28 years ago, Evelyn began, a first officer refused to let me into the cockpit because he didn't believe I was the Czech airman assigned to evaluate him. Not because of anything I did, because of who I was. She paused. That moment could have ended in anger, could have become just another story of discrimination, but instead it became a catalyst, because I decided that being dismissed wasn't going to stop me from doing my job, and doing my job meant not just flying, but changing the system that made dismissal possible. She walked them through the journey, the policies, the culture change, the industry-wide adoption of new standards. This award has my name on it, she said, but it represents the work of hundreds of people who believed aviation should be a place where competence matters more than conformity, where safety is enhanced by diversity, not threatened by it, where the next generation doesn't inherit our barriers. She clicked to her final slide. Numbers. Female airline pilots in 2000, 4.3%. Female airline pilots today, 12.7%. Airlines with gender equity policies, 89%. Reported harassment incidents, down 71%. Female pilot retention, up 89%. We're not done, Evelyn said. 12% is better than 4%, but it's nowhere near equality. But we're moving in the right direction, because people decided that change was possible, and then they did the work to make it real. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Evelyn used the platform from the award to launch something she'd been planning for years. The Flight Path Mentorship Program, connecting experienced female pilots with women at every stage of their aviation careers. Student pilots paired with commercial pilots. First officers paired with captains. New captains paired with chief pilots and training captains. A network of support, advice, and advocacy. Within 6 months, they had 400 mentor pairs across 12 airlines. Within a year, 1,200. The program expanded to include pilots of color, LGBTQ pilots, pilots with disabilities, anyone who faced systemic barriers. And the stories started pouring in. A mentee who was considering quitting after repeated harassment decided to stay after her mentor helped her file effective reports. A student pilot got hired at her dream airline after her mentor helped her navigate the interview process. A first officer became a captain 2 years ahead of schedule after her mentor advocated for her in promotion discussions. These weren't just feel-good stories. They were measurable outcomes. Retention up, promotion rates up, satisfaction up. The program worked because it addressed what Evelyn had learned over 3 decades. Competence wasn't enough if you were navigating a biased system alone. But competence plus support could change everything. At 62, Evelyn faced a decision. She could fly until 65, the mandatory retirement age for commercial pilots. Or she could retire early and focus full-time on the mentorship program and advocacy work. It was Lisa who finally helped her decide. Evelyn, you've been flying for 31 years. You've been chief pilot for 8. You've changed an entire industry. What do you still want to accomplish? Evelyn thought about that. I want to make sure the changes stick, that they don't disappear when I'm gone. Then you need to build the infrastructure that outlasts you, and you can't do that while also running flight operations. Evelyn knew she was right. She announced her retirement 6 months later. The farewell ceremony was emotional. Dozens of pilots she'd trained spoke. The CEO called her the most influential leader in the company's history. But the moment that stuck with Evelyn came at the end. Chen stood up. I know I'm not on the program, he said, but I need to say something. He looked at Evelyn. 11 years ago, I refused to let Captain Grant into the cockpit. I questioned her credentials. I undermined her authority. I was biased, arrogant, and wrong. His voice was steady but full of emotion. She could have ended my career. Instead, she gave me a chance to learn. And she didn't just teach me how to fly better, she taught me how to be better, how to recognize my biases, how to respect everyone in the cockpit, how to build the kind of culture where everyone can excel. He paused. I'm a captain now, and a check airman, and every time I evaluate someone, I think about what Captain Grant taught me, not in a classroom, in that moment when she responded to my bias with grace and accountability. I'm a better pilot and a better person because of her, and so is this entire airline. Evelyn had to look away for a moment, blinking back tears. That was the legacy she wanted. Not perfection, not revenge. Change. Real, lasting, generational change. In retirement, Evelyn founded the Grant Aviation Equity Initiative, a nonprofit focused on removing barriers for underrepresented groups in aviation. Scholarships for flight training, advocacy for policy changes, research on bias in hearing and promotion, support for airlines implementing culture change. The board included Lisa, Robert, who'd become one of her strongest allies, Tara, and 3 other female pilots who'd come up through the ranks during the years of change. They raised $4 million in the first year, funded 40 full scholarships for women and people of color pursuing aviation careers, consulted with 18 airlines on culture initiatives, published groundbreaking research on evaluation bias that was cited by the FAA. And Evelyn finally felt like she could breathe. For 31 years, she'd carried the weight of representation, of being first, of fighting every day to be seen, heard, believed. Now she could rest. Not retire from the work, she'd never do that. But rest in the knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. That the next generation had support she'd never had. That the systems were changing. That the fight was being carried forward by hundreds of people who'd learned from her example. 10 years after Chen blocked her from the cockpit, Evelyn got a call. Captain Grant, it's Michael Torres. I don't know if you remember me. Of course, I remember you, Michael. You were the captain I evaluated when Jason was your first officer. Right, well, I'm calling because I've just been named chief pilot, and I wanted your advice. Evelyn smiled. Congratulations, that's wonderful. Thank you, but I'm terrified, because I know this job is about more than managing operations. It's about culture, and I don't know if I'm equipped to do what you did. Michael, what do you remember from that evaluation? Everything. You stayed calm when Jason was being completely out of line. You held him accountable without destroying him. You evaluated me fairly even though the situation was tense. You modeled exactly what a leader should be. Then you already know what to do, Evelyn said. Lead with integrity, hold people accountable, create systems that support everyone, and don't accept that bias is just how things are. You have the power to change that. Will you help me? Not officially, I know you're retired, but as a mentor. Absolutely. Over the next year, Evelyn met with Michael monthly, helped him navigate conflicts, advised on policy decisions, supported him when he faced pushback for continuing the culture changes she'd started. And she watched him thrive, watched him promote 3 more women to check airman positions, watched him expand the diversity recruiting program, watched him handle a harassment complaint swiftly and decisively, sending a clear message that the culture of accountability was here to stay. You're doing great work, Evelyn told him during one of their calls. I'm just continuing what you started. No, Evelyn said. You're building on what we started together, and you're making it your own. That's exactly what should happen. 12 years after the Cockpit incident, a filmmaker approached Evelyn. She wanted to make a documentary about women in aviation. Evelyn's story would be the centerpiece, but it would also feature dozens of other women at various stages of their careers. I want to show the arc, the filmmaker said. From the barriers you faced to the changes you created to the women flying today because of those changes. Evelyn agreed with one condition. This can't be just about me. It has to show the collective effort, the women who came before me, the ones who stood with me, the ones who are carrying it forward. The documentary took 2 years to film. They interviewed 75 women pilots. They got footage of Simone Washington, the student who'd visited Evelyn's office years ago, now a first officer at a major airline. They filmed Tara Williams, now a Czech airman herself, training the next generation. They interviewed Chen, who spoke candidly about his biases and his journey to overcome them. And they showed the numbers, the cultural shift, the policy changes. The title, Breaking Altitude, Women Who Changed Aviation. It premiered at Sundance, won the Audience Award, got picked up by a major streaming service. And suddenly, Evelyn's story reached millions of people. Parents showed it to daughters considering aviation careers. Airlines used it in training programs. Universities assigned it in leadership courses. And Evelyn's inbox filled with messages. I didn't know this history. I'm pursuing aviation because of your story. Thank you for fighting so we don't have to fight as hard. 15 years after Chen blocked the cockpit door, Evelyn received an invitation. The airline was naming their training center after her. The Evelyn Grant Aviation Training Center. She stood at the dedication ceremony, looking at the building that would bear her name. Thinking about the 31 years of flying, the fights, the documentation, the reports that were ignored until they couldn't be. Thinking about the moment she'd had to prove herself to a first officer she'd trained. And thinking about how that moment had become a catalyst for everything that followed. This building, she said in her speech, represents more than training. It represents the idea that aviation is for everyone, that competence isn't defined by appearance, that the sky belongs to anyone skilled enough and brave enough to claim it. She looked out at the audience, hundreds of pilots, many of them women, many of them people of color. When I started flying, I was often the only woman in the room, the only black person, and I was told in 1,000 subtle ways that I didn't belong, that I should be grateful for being allowed in, That I should accept less respect, lower expectations, constant questioning of my abilities. She paused. I refused to accept that, not because I'm special, but because I knew that if I accepted it, the next generation would have to as well, and they deserved better. This building will train thousands of pilots over the coming decades, and my hope is that they'll walk through these doors and never question whether they belong, that they'll be evaluated on their skills, not their appearance, that they'll be given the respect that competence earns, regardless of who demonstrates it. She smiled. That's the legacy I want. Not a building with my name on it, but a culture where competence is recognized, where professionalism is expected, where everyone gets to focus on flying instead of fighting. The applause washed over her, and Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not because the fight was over, it never would be, but because the fight was being carried forward by people who understood what she'd learned. Change happens when you refuse to accept that bias is inevitable. When you document instead of just enduring. When you build systems instead of just calling out individuals. When you persist with dignity instead of giving up in exhaustion. That was the work. And it was working. On the 15th anniversary of the Cockpit incident, Chen wrote Evelyn a letter. Not an email, a handwritten letter. Captain Grant, 15 years ago today, I made the biggest mistake of my career. I refused to let you into the cockpit. I questioned your credentials. I undermined your authority. I let my biases control my actions. You responded with grace I didn't deserve. You held me accountable but gave me a chance to learn. And you didn't just change my career, you changed my life. I'm now Chief Training Captain at the Airline. I oversee Czech Airman development, and everything I do is built on what you taught me. I make sure every new Czech Airman understands that bias is real and they have to actively work against it. I make sure evaluation criteria are objective. I make sure everyone who walks into a cockpit is treated with the respect their competence deserves. I'm doing this work because of you. Because you showed me that accountability doesn't have to be destructive, it can be transformative. I will spend the rest of my career trying to be worthy of the grace you showed me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not accepting that bias was just how things are. Thank you for being brave enough to demand better. With deepest respect and gratitude. Chen. Evelyn read it 3 times. Then she wrote back. Jason, thank you for this letter, and thank you for doing the work, not just in that moment 15 years ago, but every day since. The real measure of accountability isn't the apology, it's what comes after, and you've spent 15 years building something better. That matters. Keep doing it. Keep training the next generation. Keep building systems that don't require people to be extraordinary to be believed. That's how change becomes permanent. With respect, Evelyn Grant. 20 years after Chen blocked her from the cockpit, Evelyn sat in her home office, looking at a wall covered with photos. Her first solo flight. Her first day as an airline pilot. Her promotion to captain. The day she became chief pilot. The women she trained, mentored, advocated for. And one photo that always made her smile. Simone Washington, now a captain herself, standing in front of an aircraft with a huge grin. Evelyn's phone rang. It was Simone. Captain Grant, I have news. Tell me. I've been selected as a Czech airman. I'm going through training next month. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Simone, that's wonderful. Congratulations.